Hello traders, welcome back to another session with PrimeXar. Happy Onam to all the viewers. Welcome and welcome back again. In today's session, we are going to discuss something unusual, but we'll make sure we are learning something out of it. Today, we're going to discuss the World War II and how that impacted the entire money system. So sit back and imagine we are in 1945. The war have just settled. The countries are rebuilding their cities and the economies. But on the other hand, the money system was also being rebuilt. You know, the Britain pound, which was once a king, is wounded. The Germans' Reichsmark have collapsed. But slowly, the US dollar have come back with gold and power, very likely to take up the crown. So stay tuned as we're going to discuss how the World War II have impacted the money system, how the US dollar have rise, and how the Britain pound have fallen. We'll also understand what traders like you and me can learn out of this World War II crisis. Okay, let me start with a question. So, what do you think? Which currency might have become the world's anchor just after the World War II? Let me give you some choices. US dollar, was it Great Britain pound, or was it the Swiss franc? If you're smart enough, I have already shared that in the introduction. So let me share. Let me see the answers. Okay, I see US dollar. I also see GBPs. Okay, let me give you the answer. The US dollar have become the world's anchor just after the World War II. You know, it have also helped the euro and Japan with some credits. So in today's session, we'll explore more about how each of the economy have affected or got impacted due to the World War II, how they have rebuilt themselves, how the currencies were impacted, and how the forex market that we are trading have come into picture. Okay, so let us understand how the wars actually move the money. So whenever there is an economic crisis happen, the governments freeze the prices and they control the ration food, and they also control how the people should use their currency. On the flip side, the black markets appear. The investors they rush to the safe havens. You know, the debts they keep shifting between the countries. And while this is happening, there were a few countries that had lost, or some countries that have won in the World War II. Let us understand each of these economies. Let's start with the Britain. In 1949, Britain, the pound, it fell from 4 to 2.8, a major devaluation. Coming to the Germany, the old Reichsmark, it was scrapped. They have introduced a new currency called the Deutschmark. And you know, with that reform, with that new currency reform, the entire economy of Germany has been restarted. Coming to Japan, the Japanese yen was fixed at $360. You know, this made the exports cheaper and it also boosted the economy. Coming to the US have become the world's banker. Like I have said, the Europe and Japan needed money and the US acted as their banker. While all this was happening, we can see that the World War made or have given second life to some countries, and have actually some other countries have lost their dominance, like the Britain pound. Now let us understand how the US dollar have taken into the picture. Something big happened in 1944. 44 countries, they gathered together in a place called Bretton Woods in USA. They all decided, or they all gathered, and they were discussing that there's a lot of chaos and we need to fix this. So they decided upon making all pegging all the currencies to dollar and pegging the US dollar to gold. Now, some of you are hearing the word pegging for the first time. Let me explain. Pegging means that the exchange rate of a currency is fixed with the value of another currency, or in this case, it is the value of gold for US dollar. So, in simple words, the exchange rate for the currencies with gold or currencies with the dollar was fixed. And in that Bretton Woods Agreement, there have also come the IMF and the World Bank, which have helped these economies rebuild themselves. Now, while I was explaining that all the currencies are pegged only to the US dollar, you might ask, why just US dollar? Let me tell you. After the World War II, the USA had the world's most gold reserves. So that made it prominent and dominant in this economy. Now, we have already learned about what happened in Japan and Britain, Germany, and USA. Then we discuss Europe. After the World War II, the Europe was broke, but it needed to trade. And then came the US with a master plan. It aided Europe with $13 billion, which made Europe back to trade again. Later, European Payments Union have come. They have decided that we are not going to pay dollars for every single trade. Instead, we will settle the trade once it is done. And the market, it was a smart move. So now that we understood about the Europe also, let me tell you, or let me ask you instead, do you think that you might have guessed the Britain pound will have collapsed or would have collapsed almost over 30% after the World War II? Let me know in the comments. Yes, I see some yes and I see some no. That is absolutely fine. Let me give you a clear picture of how this happens. In 1600s, the Dutch guilder was ruling the economy. In 1800s, the Britain ruled the economy. Then, just after the World War, like we discussed, the US dollar is now dominating the world. So, it is not that every time there will be a single currency that is always going to dominate. There will be a shift. For some currencies, it will take decade. For some, it will take centuries. And for some, it is going to take an economic crisis like the World War II. So until now, we understood how did the World War II affect the money market, or how that it had an impact on each of these currencies. Once it was dominant, and then after the World War II, it is no more dominant. And suddenly, because of huge gold reserves, the US have become dominant. Let me tell you that something different happened in 1971. This Bretton Woods Agreement was working fine for 25 years. But in early 60s, the gold reserves of the US dollar were declining. So there were more dollars and less of gold. So the then President Nixon, he have decided that no more pegging of gold, meaning the fixed exchange rate have been abandoned. That is when our beloved Forex market have come into picture. So from then, the US dollar or all the currencies are floating, meaning the prices will change on a daily basis and not once in a decade. How interesting is it? So we have also understood how the markets have moved or how we went from pegging to floating. We also understood how each of the currencies like the Britain pound, the US dollar, the Japanese yen have been impacted by the World War II. So, as a trader, we might ask, what are the takeaways or what should I learn from the history like this? Let me tell you. The wars actually move the money. So, we should be prepared for it. The dollar have become dominant because it had major gold by the end of the World War II. We also understood that the pegging was cancelled and they introduced the floating system, which gave the traders daily opportunities. So this was the history. These are the takeaways from the history. So what are we looking for in the future? Let us assume if something like this is going to happen in the future, we should be prepared, or I should say, we should have a checklist to understand or to be on a safe side. So every time that we are trading, when especially in the currency market, since we have seen that an economical crisis can impact the currencies, let us have a quick checklist. First thing we have to know is that the currency that you're trading, is it a pegged or a floating currency? Meaning, does it have a fixed exchange rate or a floating exchange rate? As a fixed exchange rate might look prominent, but once it collapses so hard, like we have seen in the Britain pound in the 1949. If it is floating, although there are changes on a daily basis, but you know what you should expect. Next, we should understand the country at which you're taking that currency from. Does that country have enough of reserves? If it is running out of reserves, it might not still be the dominant currency in the market. Then we should also understand that if we are trading or if the world's anchor like the US dollar, if it is taking a stance, what are the other currencies that are going to take a hit? If you are prepared with all of these checklists, I'm sure that you will be prepared for the crisis. At least you know that in which currencies you should trade and you know which are the trade heaven. Okay, okay, traders. This is not the end. Let me leave you with a question. Let us assume that an economical crisis is going to come. In that situation, would you still think after the situation, would you still think that the US dollar will still be the dominant currency? Or do you think that there will be another currency that can, take up the world's anchor? Think it to yourself, or you can also drop the comments. So, as we said, the World War did not just actually impact on a demographic or a geographical era. It have also changed the entire money system. It gave us US dollar as a reserve. It actually humbled the pound and it also helped the Japanese yen and German to restructure. And as a trader, it is our duty or our job to learn from all the patterns that are happening. So I hope from this session, you are now well prepared to face any future crisis and you will know how the currencies are impacted by an economical event like this. Until then, trade safe and trade smart. See you in the next session.